asked me to do. I can't do it anymore. Can you purify me? Will you get out of my head and into my stomach? Purify me. Purify me!
And so what we're looking to do is to place new buildings that are going to actually increase the total amount of square feet that we have available for library use, so we can have larger collections, we can have more computers, we can have meeting rooms, where like most of our city branches don't even have a meeting space for community rooms or library programs. So we'll be able to incorporate all those into these new buildings and actually have more space for library use than what we have currently, but actually be less expensive for us to operate. Because we're going to build green buildings and make sure that they're going to have the kind of design that allow for us to operate them with the same amount of staffing, even though they're going to be more square feet out there. So that's kind of the outcomes that we're hoping that this facilities plan will give us. In order for us to do that, we need to find that. We need to find the operating or the capital funds to do that. So we've put together a proposal that's going to be on the ballot, a ballot initiative that'll be on the November ballot for rebuilding the library system. It's going to mean building a new branch about a mile away, probably from the current Dayton branch, because up there by Good Sam there, we actually have 3 branches that are all within a mile of that, and that they all are very old. None of them have meeting rooms. They all have, real issues with their buildings, one way or the other, whether it's the lack of parking or whether they don't have, the meeting spaces, or they're inefficient to operate. And that by building one much larger building, we can actually serve that same population much more effectively. So we can do things like, have longer hours. We can have better collections, since we won't be duplicating some titles at all 3 locations. And this again helps with that sustainability piece as well as that improved service. So that's kind of the sketch, the overview of what's in the plan, some of the rationale for it.
Okay.
Everybody wants to know, well, what's going to happen with our old buildings?
Yes, that was my next question. Like, what's going to happen with them? How are you going to ensure that they're not going to become blights, as we've experienced so many other buildings?
Right. The thing that I like to make certain people are aware of, that we're fortunate in one regard, or in a couple of regards, but one of the aspects of it is that I know, particularly in that northwest area there, we've seen things like Sean Acres and Julianne, where buildings had been left unprotected, and they became
full of raccoons and broken into, and all the stuff that comes with being empty and abandoned.
Right. And so what I'd like to make the distinction is, one is that this building, the Dayton View branch, or the other branches that we're talking about, are much smaller facilities. They are in much better shape. I've had multiple conversations with various groups who have suggested that we donate these buildings to one organization or another for some alternative use. And I would like to see whatever that best possible alternative use might be before we make a decision on what that is. But we're fortunate in the sense that, unlike a Julianne or like the old Roosevelt High School, those buildings were just so huge and so there was almost worked against them for an alternative use because they were so big for their for what could be conceivably used for them. We're fortunate in the sense that these are like 4,000 or 5,000 square foot buildings that have a lot more appeal. They'll have these huge hallways in them that are very difficult for a kind of a multiple use scenario that these other facilities have had. So amongst the ideas that have come up most recently, I think
I got a question about as far as like the transferal of like public properties. I'm a taxpayer, and for example, someone might say, "Hey, the taxpayers paid for those properties. Is it unfair to be donating these properties to a private entity, or whether that be a nonprofit or anything like that, when those are our assets that we paid for? How can they be just like donated in a way?"
I was never the one that suggested that we donate these. These are groups that have come to us and said, "Hey, why don't you donate this to us?" Even a better example of your argument there that I wholly agree with you on that is Preservation Dayton Incorporated came up with a scenario that we would again donate the building to them in some fashion so that they could remarket that with some tax credits in a way that would allow for that next tenant to make sure that they were going to be successful in using and keeping that building occupied. And I can understand where they're coming from because they were just coming off of the pain of seeing the demolition of Julianne and what's going on at Shawn and Acres and some of the other properties that are out there. Again, another distinction that I would really like to make is the fact that our buildings, even the ones that don't have any kind of architectural
grandiosity
interest to it, are ones that we've done an excellent job of maintaining them. We've used that building for 82 years as a library, and we treat it with great respect, and it looks like it, and that's one of those things that any reuse is going to be a whole lot easier because the fact that it's we just put $30,000 into a new boiler several years ago in order to again to make sure that this thing is still operational, and we're going to still need to make some investment in that in the near future because even if we build or if we pass this bond issue in November, it's going to be a couple years before we actually have this new building up and running, and it'll be some time before we actually finally close that building there. So it's not something that's going to happen in the short term.
Okay. One more question.
We need to make that investment there.
Okay.
So I'm not opposed to these alternative uses that people have, but I want to make sure that whatever they're going to do is something that is sustainable, and there may be some alternative use that somebody comes up with that is a private development, and that we're not going to give that building away. I mean that's too valuable of a property. As a matter of fact, I'm using a local consulting firm to do an appraisal of all these buildings, so we know what our likely market value of the buildings are, what kind of zoning issues we would have to deal with if we were to no longer use it for a library location.
Okay.
So we're not just because people suggested like the Mount Vernon that they would like us to give it to them.
I'll take one, by the way.
What's that?
I said I'll take one, by the way.
Oh yeah, okay. We're gonna go in this with our eyes wide open about what the potentials are. I like the idea of there being an alternative use that keeps that building open and available to the public in some way, shape, or form. But as I met with the people with Mount Vernon, I said, you've got to come up with the burden's on you to come up with a viable plan. I'm not certain our board is even if they did come up with a funding source to help operate that as a public space for something that's very near and dear to our own issue, and that is literacy, that we would just give that building away.
What considerations are there being made for? A lot of times I see new buildings being built that are just completely incongruent with the kind of the stylings of the neighborhood. And one of the great things Urban Crag Climbing Center is a rock gym located in Dayton, Ohio, with 8,000 feet of textured and sculpted vertical terrain ranging from 28 to 56 feet. For more info, go to urbancrag.com or call 937-224-CRAG. After World War II was, how to build a city that's congruent with some sort of architectural and aesthetic standards. And it's kind of like throwing a big box in the middle of a historic, like, Victorian era homes. And what kind of considerations are you guys making to make sure that any new libraries at least fit a little bit within the aesthetic look of an area, so that it doesn't look like a spaceship came down from Earth or from outer space and and just completely doesn't make any sense with the area and the architecture and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people give me their opinions of about the art design of the new City of Dayton school buildings. That they were not real pleased with what they saw, and I know that they were, to a certain extent, constricted by what that school facilities commission that the state imposed certain criteria on in terms of what they could do with them. I know they had used local architects to design those buildings. So I can't blame it all on Columbus. The thing that's unique about libraries, I think, is that they do have a unique place in a community that people expect more than just being a box sitting out there.
And that's kind of like what the theme of, like, when you would go to what I see lacking now in educational institutions, when you'd go to some of these older schools, it was almost like, this is a church for education. That it's, the design of the building reflects our reverence of what's going on inside.
Yeah, certainly. Those sensibilities are important to us. How they manifest themselves will be something that we'll address as we do the actual design work for these buildings. We've not engaged any design architects yet to design these buildings. We are certainly going to have public process in place as we do that. Right now, we're kind of trying to focus on, where can we place these buildings in a way that gives us the square footage that we need, that has the parking that we want to include within the site, that the relationship between where we're going to build the new buildings and relative to each other, relative to where the old buildings were at, relative to where the current economic and cultural pathways are today. Because, we see things changing in our community about where people live and where they use other services. And we're also looking to see where new opportunities present themselves. One of the things that I use as an example is that City of Kettering. They have the Rosewood Art Center. I'm not familiar with that at all. I've never been over there. But that's tucked away in an old, unused, former Kettering school building, and it was never really designed as an art center, and it's really pretty inefficient. Well, it's, I think, falling apart, as they say. And so we're talking with them and actually got a grant to investigate the possibility of building a joint facility with the City of Kettering. It's going to be a library/art center where we could do a number of things, such as share some of the infrastructure like lobbies, meeting rooms, bathrooms, HVAC, things like that, and actually reduce the cost of it. But it offers also a great opportunity for us to do things that are collaborative in terms of programming. It's, as one parent told me recently, that she liked this idea so much because, when I go to an art class, what do I do with my child? Can my child be at the library, or when vice versa, can my child be at a program while I'm using the library? That those are the kinds of advantages that we're going to try to build into it. Well, we're going to have an exhaustive community dialogue about whether that's a good idea for Kettering, and second, will we fit in that space that we've got designated, and how will that space get designed in the way that does justice to the community and as well as the neighborhood. We're going to other locations. We'll have another 10 locations that'll either be expansions or renovations of existing locations. So those that we're doing the expansions and renovations to, those are ones where, we've already had existing buildings. We'll probably make them look better, but they won't be substantially different in terms of their street view or other elements that are a part of it.
So then he said it's not going to cut the mustard.
Really?
And that was that.
Let's try a little test. What do you see here?
It's a sandwich. It's a sandwich. It's a sandwich.
I'm sensing a pattern here.